Hello, welcome to this new video from Finance Re. My name's Simon, not name. Today we're going to talk about a few different options that we have when we want to be able to refresh a single table or maybe just a couple of tables within our Power BI data model. Now, as you know, if you want to refresh the whole data model, that can often take a long time, maybe several hours, depending on where we're sourcing our data from and the volumes of data. And Power BI doesn't make it that straightforward for us just to be able to refresh one or two small tables. So we'll look at a number of options and we'll discuss the pros and cons of each. But first, I wanted to just think about some of the business cases and why we might want to just refresh one or two small tables. And there really is a lot of examples. So if we think of budgeting, often we might take our actual data from a sort of transactional source system, and maybe our budget data is held in a spreadsheet and we want to be able to update that spreadsheet quickly and then see the results in our model straight away without having to refresh all that source data. Another example would be perhaps reconciliations, comparing two data sets. We want to be able to keep a spreadsheet of the differences that we've investigated so that we can then just see what the remaining difference is. Another example would be scenario modelling, where we want to quickly input some scenarios, bring them into our model and be able to see the impact of those scenarios on our numbers. So yeah, lots and lots of different examples. And before we get into the individual options, I'd just like to go through the scenario example, and hopefully that will make it completely clear of why we need to just refresh the single table. Okay, let's go over to our laptop and take a look. So this is an example report that an insurer might use to report on their written premium and to track how they're performing against plan and to do some scenario analysis. So this report's been published to the Power BI service, so we're viewing it in the browser. So let's go to our, let me just make this larger. If we go to our summary screen, so we can see here we're at March 2022. So you can see on the left hand side, the blue line is our actual written premium year to date. And written premium is just sales for an insurance company. And the dotted blue line is our forecast, which is a driver driven forecast for the rest of the year. And we're comparing that against our plan for the year, which is the grey line. So we're below plan at March and we're expecting to be below plan by December. So we can do some very simple what if analysis within the report. So let's say we want to see the impact of increasing our prices. As you can see now, our forecast for the remainder of the year has increased. The dotted blue line has moved up, and so the grey dotted line is our original forecast. Now, these changes, these will apply to all of the business within the model that's selected with the current filters that we're viewing. If we wanted to do some more granular scenarios, then we need a different way to be able to enter those, and we can do that via a spreadsheet. And you can see I've got a few detailed scenarios here actually. So if I click on one of these, you can also see the forecast has changed again, so we can see the effect of different combinations of scenarios. So if we want to enter a new scenario, we can do that via Excel. Let's just take these away. So let's enter a new detailed scenario. So here's my spreadsheet. So we've got 3 scenarios so far. So let's put a new one and say we're going to increase prices, but we don't want to show them a price increase for every period. We're only going to increase prices from Q2. So let's say price increase Q2. And let's say we're only going to, rather than all of the business, we only want to apply it to a particular region. Let's just copy that for the description. So now we only want to apply this from July to December, and we're only going to apply it for Europe. And let's put in a good increase so we can see the results. and then let's save this new scenario. Obviously, if I'm a business user, I've entered my new scenario. I want to see what the impact of that is in the model straight away. But if we go back to Power BI, so we come to the Power BI service. Now to see, obviously need to refresh that data within the model to see the impact of that new scenario. Now in the service, here's my data set. I can come here and I can click to initiate a ad hoc refresh of the data, but that will refresh all of the tables within the model, including our source data from our policy admin system, which could take several hours, or our report may be set up to refresh overnight, in which case I'd have to wait till tomorrow. So not an ideal solution. Obviously, for scenario analysis, you want to be able to experiment and quickly see the results. So I've set this report up so that we can refresh these individual tables. So if we go back to our home screen, I've got a settings pane here. You can see I've got a button, refresh scenario details. You just click that, and that will refresh just that individual scenarios table, so just that small spreadsheet. Now if we go to our summary, and I might just need to refresh the visuals in the browser. So you can see now our new scenario has appeared, and that was just seconds to refresh that small table. And I can now choose that, and I can see just the price increase impact from July onwards. And actually, if I analyse this by region, because we said we only wanted the Europe region to be impacted, let's make this larger. So you can see here for Europe, you can see the blue line, which is our new forecast with the scenario applied, whereas for the other regions, the original forecast has been maintained. So we've just got our detailed scenario applied as we wished. So I hope that provided a good example of why we may want to refresh one or more small tables very quickly without refreshing the whole model. In the next part of the video, we'll look at a few different options that we can use to achieve this, including the option that we used for this example. So as I explained in the introduction to this video, we've got a number of different options that we can use to refresh individual tables in Power BI. And in this video, we're going to look at 5 of those. I'm sure there are others. I don't think this is a complete list of the options. Do get in touch in the comments if you do something different to any of these. Be very interested to hear from you. But without further ado, I think let's go over to my laptop and we'll start going through the first option. So for the purposes of testing our different options, I've created this very simple data model in Power BI. As you can see, we've got 3 tables. The sales fact table, that's representing our sales transactions from our source system. And the idea is that in real life, that would be a very large table that maybe would take a long time to refresh in the data model. In fact, in this example, I've just built a very simple table in Power Query. So you can see it's just got 2 columns, the product and the sales amount. It is a large table, so there's 100 million rows, but each row is just a different product name and a sales amount of 1. So it's a very simple table. Actually, refreshing this would take about 5 minutes in this model. And then we've got our widgets tax rates, and this is the small table that we want to be able to refresh on an ad hoc basis. And this is just imported from Excel. So let me show you that table. So you can see it's again just we've got 5 different products, each of which has a different tax rate, and also we can update these tax rates and then refresh those in the model. And then both these tables are just joined by a table with the list of product names. And if we have a look, I've then built a report. So we have our products, we have our sales for each product, and the tax rate for each product, which is from our spreadsheet, and the tax rate applied to the sales gives us our tax amount. So very, very simple model, but it'll be a good model for testing our different refresh options. And actually the first of those options was to use Power BI Desktop to do the refresh. So unlike the Power BI service, Power BI Desktop does allow us to just refresh the individual tables. So I can come over to the list of tables here on the right, find the table I want to refresh, and just refresh the data, and that will then refresh that individual table. And we can then publish our report to the service once it's updated. So I wanted to include using Power BI Desktop as an option in this video. Obviously it's very simple and straightforward. It doesn't need premium capacity, which some of the other options that we'll look at do require. I think it's only really suitable where you've got obviously a relatively small report that you can refresh easily on your computer, and where you've got a report that's used by a small number of users so that they can collaborate easily, and those users need to be familiar with Power BI Desktop obviously. You also have to publish the report each time, which can take a little bit of time as well, and it does preclude the use of some of the features in the service, so incremental refresh, scheduled refresh for example, that we wouldn't be able to take advantage of in this scenario. But for certain scenarios, small reports, small teams, I think it is a viable option. Okay, let's have a look at our next option, which is the use of direct query. So for our second option, we're going to take a look at the use of direct query. You can see on the screen we're in Power BI Desktop. You can see the same data model that we had before, but you'll notice that the tax rates table now has this blue line along the top of it, and that's to signify that we are in direct query mode. I'll just zoom in. You can see storage mode direct query, and that means that rather than importing the data, we've got, if you like, a live connection. So any changes to the source data will immediately be updated in our report. It pulls the data in as it needs to from the source. And you can see the data source type is data flows. That's because we can't connect to an Excel spreadsheet in direct query mode. And you know our tax rates, if you remember, are in an Excel spreadsheet. But we can read that spreadsheet using a Power BI data flow, and then we can connect to that data flow data in direct query mode. It sounds a little bit complicated, but it's really quite straightforward. I've got a slide which hopefully will help to understand it. I'll move myself out of your way. So here you can see on the left hand side, here's our data model, here's our tax rates table, and then we're using direct query to read the data live from the Power BI data flow, and that pulls the data in from the tax rates. Now if we make a change in our Excel spreadsheet, obviously we need to have that reflected in our data flow data. And what works quite nicely is we can use Power Automate. So here's our report. See, we've got a button here. We can use that button to initiate a Power Automate flow, and that Power Automate will initiate a refresh of the data flow so that the data flow has the latest data, and obviously that will then be immediately reflected in our report because we've got a live connection to that data flow data. Let me first show you the Power Automate. So it's a very simple Power Automate, just 2 steps. Let me zoom in on this again. So you can see here, when the Power BI button is clicked, then refresh a data flow. And this is a standard operation in Power Automate, so this is really easy to set up. Just specify your workspace and the data flow that you want to refresh. So very easy. So let's look, if we go to our report in the service. So you can see we've got the Power Automate button here, refresh tax rates. So let's get our tax rates in our spreadsheet. And I'll make a couple of changes. I'm just going to, let's just double these last 2. Save that. And then, obviously that's our spreadsheet updated. We need to refresh the data flow. So let's press the Power Automate button. We'll just give that a few seconds for the data flow to refresh. Now if I refresh the visuals in Power BI, so you can see now our tax rates reflect that change and the tax amount has updated. So yeah, very nice user interface, very simple to set up. Let's quickly go through the pros and cons for this approach. So that's the direct query approach. It's very easy to set up, and I think it's a very nice user experience. You can just press the button, refresh within the report. You don't even need to go to the refresh in the Power BI service, and yes, it works very well. There's some disadvantages. Firstly, you need to have premium capacity or premium per user in order to be able to do direct query to data flows. But the main drawback is whenever we use direct query, because we've not imported all of the data into our report, Power BI is having to go out every time it refreshes the visuals, or a filter is changed. Power BI reads the data from the data source, and there's a performance impact of doing that. So the report will always be a bit slower than if all the tables are in import mode. So it's probably worth, for a specific example, just trying that out and seeing whether the performance is still acceptable or if it's just too slow, and that would really rule out using direct query. So let's look at our next approach, which is using external tools and connecting to the XMLA endpoint. So for our third option, we're going to look at connecting to Power BI using external tools via the XMLA endpoint. Now, you do need premium capacity to use this option, or premium per user. And there are some setting in the admin for the tenant that needs to be enabled. So here I am in Power BI. So I go to the admin portal. So I have premium per user capacity. So under premium per user, you can see we have this setting XMLA endpoint read write. And that needs to be set to read write for this method to work. So if you don't have admin rights to the tenant, you'll need to speak to your Power BI administrator to get that enabled. Okay, so once that's enabled, once that's enabled, you can use a number of tools to connect to Power BI datasets in the service. Tabular Editor 3 is a very popular one. I'm going to use for this demo SQL Server Management Studio, which I have open. So let me switch to that. So we need to connect, and we're going to connect its analysis services. And here we need a server name. Now we need a name we need that for our workspace. So let me go to the workspace and settings, premium, and here you can see workspace connection. So I'll copy that, paste that in there. I just need to authenticate. Okay, and now I'm connected. So over on the left hand side now I should be able to see all of the data sets in my workspace, and we'll use the original model with all the tables imported, and here we can see our tables, and here's our tax rates table that we wish to refresh. So actually, before we do that, let's go to the report in the service. So here's our report, and let's update the tax rates in our spreadsheet. save that. Okay, and then using SQL Server Management Studio, I'm just going to right click on that table, process table. And there's a few process options. I'll do a full process. And that should then just take a few seconds to connect to the table in Power BI Service and refresh. So that is complete. Go back to our report, let's refresh the visuals, and you can see that the tax rates and the tax amount has been updated. So very, very straightforward. So option 3 was connecting using external tools to connect to the XMLA endpoint. And you saw that that was very straightforward. There's not really anything to set up. So it's a very good option, provided that you've got admin rights to enable the XMLA endpoint, or your Power BI admin is happy to use the switch on the read write setting for you, then it's a good option. Also, perhaps it's not ideal if you want business users or maybe finance users to be able to refresh the table on an ad hoc basis. There's a little bit of training needed to use those tools, I would say, and they can be a little bit intimidating to non-technical users who've not used those tools before. But if you do that little bit of training, then it's a very straightforward option. Now let's have a look at our fourth option, which is composite models. Our fourth option is to use a composite model. Now, composite models have been around in Power BI for a couple of years now, per this Power BI blog article since December 2020, but have only just become general availability, so have just come out of preview literally in April 2023, so just a couple of weeks ago. And the idea with a composite model is that it allows users to connect to a Power BI dataset, and that might be a large enterprise-wide dataset, and then they can augment that dataset by bringing in other data sources, so like our spreadsheet, maybe a SharePoint list, and or other database, could be any source really, to make a new data set for their own, if you like, departmental use. So the use case that we've been looking at is very much the sort of scenario that composite models were designed for. Now, a whole composite models really, it should be a whole video on their own. There are lots of intricacies and considerations. So I'm really going to just scratch the surface in this video. But we will look how a composite model is built, and I'll show you how it achieves our aims of allowing users to refresh the, if you like, the augmenting data, the extra tables they've brought in quickly, and without having to refresh all of the source data. Okay, so let's go to the Power BI service, and you can see here here's my data sets. I've got what I've called a widget sales source only data set. Now if I open this, zoom in, you can see in this data set there's only two tables, the product table and the sales fact table. So these are tables in the data model coming from the source system, and we don't have in that the tax rates table yet. So the idea is this would be, if you like, your enterprise-wide data set, and then we want to augment that data set by bringing in the additional information we need for our departmental analysis, maybe finance department. Okay, so what we'll do, let's do it together. So in Power BI Desktop, I'm going to get a new file. So I've opened a new file, and we're going to build this new composite data set. So first thing, I want to get data, and I'm going to go to get data from Power BI datasets. And I'm going to connect to the data set that just has the source tables. So So here we are, widget sales source only data set. So let's connect to that. Okay, so you can see we've brought in two tables, product and sales fact. Let's have a look at the data model. And if I hover over these, going to work. You can see that the data source is a SQL Server Analysis Services database. And the blue line shows that we've got a live connection. So we haven't imported that data. It's a live connection to a SQL Server Analysis Services model. So now I want to augment this model that I've connected to with my spreadsheet data. So get data, I'm going to do blank query. And you can see I've got this prompt now that we're going to switch to a direct query connection to the model that we've connected to. And I'm going to add a local model. And the local model is the extra tables, if you like, that I'm bringing in. So let's do that. Okay, it's telling me which tables I can choose, which tables I want to bring in from my source model, if you like, which we want to keep both the ones that we've connected to already. And here's my blank Power Query. I've got the Power Query already written. I'll just paste that into the advanced editor. We'll call this tax rates. And you can see here's our products, here's our tax rates, so that all looks good. Let's close and apply. Okay, you get this potential security risk. I'm happy that all my data sources are coming from within my enterprise, so that's fine. So here's my new table. Actually, I just need to make this, and I can make a connection from my local tables back to my source data model. Okay, so now you can see the data model very much like it was before, but now these source tables have got the blue line to show that they're direct query, so they're not brought into our, the data's not imported into our model. And here's our local tables, which is import mode, just in the usual way. Actually, that's a bi-directional relationship. Certainly don't want that. It's complicated enough. There we are. Okay, so happy with this data model now. So this is our composite model, and then we could build our report in exactly the same way that we did, just using the normal model with all the import data. And then, so I have done that already and published that to the service. So let me close this. So here's our composite model in the service. So this is just exactly as we've seen before, and you can see so there was a measure for this tax amount. Everything's built in exactly the same way, and it just works in the same way. Now, if we bring in our tax rates in our spreadsheet, let's change some of these, 5, 6, 7. Okay, I'll save that. Oh, sorry, this was in Power BI desktop here. Let's go to the workspace in Power BI service. So here's my composite model report. Okay, and yeah, so now if I want to show the updated tax rates. Let's go back, and here's my let's find my data set. composite model dataset, and I can refresh that in the service. So we can see that refreshing, and that should be very quick because it's not refreshing the large tables that are coming from our source model. It's only refreshing the local tables, so the extra tables that we've brought in. And it's very good practice, certainly with composite models, to make sure that those additional tables are small, which they obviously are in this case. So that's refreshed, just a few seconds. And then let's go back to our report. Oh, hasn't changed. Let's refresh the... Okay, there we are. So yes, so you can now see that tax rates have been updated and the new amounts being shown. So yeah, it works extremely well. I've not used composite models in a production scenario before, mainly because they were in preview. Now there is lots of things to think about, and I would definitely recommend looking at the documentation before deciding to go whether a composite model would be suitable for your scenario. So to summarise composite models over Power BI datasets, the main advantage they have and what they were intended for is to enable a split between administration and management of large enterprise-wide models, while also allowing departmental users or downstream Power BI users to augment those models with additional small tables that they need to do their analysis. So really exactly the scenario that we've been talking about, where we have a large tables coming from a source system and then small additional tables that we want to bring in from Excel. So the main disadvantages of this composite model pattern are really the increasing complexity that it introduces. I'd really recommend reading the Microsoft documentation very carefully, which does a good job of explaining that complexity and the need to really structure the model carefully to make sure that it is still performing well. There's also lots of good YouTube content and blogs around composite models and how to use them effectively. So let's now take a look at our final option, which is using the Power BI API. So our final method is using the Power BI API to refresh a table. And that's the method we used, if you remember back a long time ago at the start of this video, when we showed the demo with the scenarios that was using this method. So there's two parts to it. There's the API, and API stands for Application Programming Interface, which sounds very technical, but rest assured that there isn't any actual programming to do. So there's running the API. Then if you remember from our demo, we wanted a nice way to be able to initiate the API, and we did that using Power Automate. So we'll look at both parts of setting that up in this section. So firstly, it's interesting to just have a look at the API. So you can see here on screen, I'm on Microsoft's documentation for the API, and it's really incredible actually how much you can do with Power BI and the API. Just going to look here. So we want to refresh data sets. So here we are, data sets. Then there's all these different functions that you can use. We want refresh data set. So actually, before we try and set up the refresh with Power Automate, we can actually test it straight from the Microsoft website here. So you can see here's the call for the API, and there's a little button here for try it. And then I just need to sign in. And then yeah, we can put in the parameters to use the API, and we can initiate it straight from here and see if it works. So I found this a good way of checking I was doing the right thing before building anything further. So you can see we need the dataset ID. So let's go back to Power BI, and I use this version of the dataset with all the tables imported. So I click on there. So the dataset ID is, let me zoom in. So is this part of the address? So where it says datasets and then this code. So let's just copy that. Okay, and the table, you can see the tables here in this data set, widgets tax rates. That's the table we want to refresh. So here we are, here's the dataset ID. I'll paste that in there. And you can see at the top here for the URL, it's a post method and it's put the data set that we've put in there. Now in the body, if we wanted to just refresh everything, we could run that and that should refresh the whole data set. But we only want to refresh the single table. Now on the left hand side here we've got some examples. So you can see here an example of refreshing one partition. Now we don't want to refresh a partition, we want to refresh a table, but you can see it's also, you can specify the table and the partitions. So this should be close to what we need. So I'll copy that and put that into the body. Now I delete that partition part because we're going to refresh the whole table. And we want to refresh a table in the dataset we've specified called widget tax rates. Let me just check the name. Widgets tax rates. Okay, so that's the body of our request. So that should be everything we need. So actually, before we do it, let's on our spreadsheet, let's change these. Those first three, save that, and now let's run this. Okay, response code 202, that's good. Now come back to our data, our Power BI, go to our reports, and this is the report here. Refresh, and you can see that now reflects the changes that we made using the API. So that's worked, so that's good. So you can see it's using the API is pretty straightforward, and I find that documentation and being able to try it very helpful. Now we'll look at the next part of it, which is a little bit more complicated. We want to be able to run the API from Power Automate from within the report itself. So we've tested the API and we can see that that works. The next part is to build the Power Automate so that we can refresh it. We can initiate the API directly from the report. So when I built this for the scenarios report that we looked at, then I followed the instructions in this blog post from Chris Webb. I'm sure most of you watching are probably aware of Chris's blog and all the great information he provides. And he also references in his blog post another blog by Konstantinos Ioannou, who also gives a good run through. So and there's a link here to Konstantinos's blog. So between those two, I was able to follow it and get it to work. So the first stage is that we need to create a Power BI app, and Chris provides the link here. So two options, one for external parties. We're going to do for organisations' internal users. We'll be asked to sign in. Okay, next, and then register your application. So I'm not going to save this, but just to show, so give it something there. And then a URL, homepage URL. Don't think it matters what we actually put into there. And then this is the important part. So this is where, for the Power BI app, which is actually an Azure AD app, it's created after we do this, we need to say what parts of the API that app is able to run. And the important part for what we want to do is read and write all data sets. If you're intending to use other parts of the API, by all means go ahead and also authorize the same app to do those parts of the API, and then you can use that same Power BI app for running those other API commands rather than having to build a new one. So once we do that, we register. And then I'm not going to continue to create a workspace because I don't need to do that here or bring content in. So I would skip those steps. But also what's very important part is that we need to remember, so this is our application ID and the application secret. And this secret will, after we've seen it here, we need to copy and paste it somewhere safe to use later because we won't be able to see it again. We can get another secret, but you have to go through Azure to do that. So yes, make a note of these, and we'll use these details when we create our custom connector in Power Automate. So the next stage, we need to create our custom connector. So here I'm in Power Automate. Now, it's not, you won't find it in this section connectors. Instead, under data, you can see we've got custom connectors. So if I click on that, this was the one I built, which I used before. And you can see here, new custom connector, create from blank. Demo. And then this is where you then need to follow the details in Chris's and Konstantinos's blogs to go through the steps. In the interest of time, I'm not going to do this in this video. You can see there's a few steps. It doesn't actually take all that long, and then you can save and test your connector there. Obviously, I've already done that, and this is my custom connector. Now, I haven't built we need to build a flow for a specific report and tables that we want to refresh. So I haven't done that yet for the widgets report, so we can do that now. So let's go to flows, and I'm going to create a new flow. It'll be a instant cloud flow, and this is where choose how to trigger this flow. Now obviously we want to trigger it from within our Power BI report, so Power BI button clicked. So that's the trigger for our flow, and then I want to do a new step, and quite usefully you can see we've got this custom, and this is my custom connector. And you can see these are a custom connector I think is premium, so you will need to have a Power Automate license that will allow you to use custom connectors. Okay, and now we just need to fill in these details. So the group ID is the workspace ID, dataset ID is the dataset. So let me fill in these details for you now. So here's let's go to the datasets. This is the dataset for we're going to use. So let me zoom in here again. So you can see we've got groups, and then this code is what we need for the workspace ID. I'm just going to make a note of that, and then this second part after datasets is the dataset ID. So we need both of those parts. So I've filled in all the details for our flow, following the instructions in Chris's blog. Just need to add the table here that we want to refresh. Tax rates. I'll leave partitions blank because we're refreshing a whole table. We don't have individual partitions we want to refresh. Now, if we wanted to, we could add further tables. So within a single flow, we could refresh more than one table, and we just add a new item here and put the extra tables if we wanted to do that. Otherwise, I think that looks good. So we save. And it does say recommend you test your flow. I don't think we can use this test in the top right. We see that this flow cannot be triggered for testing. I think that's because of the trigger has to be from Power BI, because we've used the Power BI trigger. and you can click here and give your flow a better name than the default one. So refresh widgets using API. So we save. And there we are, there's our flow ready to be used in our Power BI report. So let's go to Power BI desktop now. And I've got my report here that I want to use, and I'm going to insert the Power Automate visual, which you can see here. And there's some instructions here, but I normally just go on this button here, edit. And here it's showing a list of my flows. Now, these are the flows in my personal environment. One thing I have found a problem is if you have flows in different environments in Power Automate, I'm not sure there's a way to connect to those from Power BI. So that's a consideration when you're in an enterprise environment, is making sure the flow is somewhere where you can actually connect to it from Power BI. Refresh widgets using API. And then we want to apply. You successfully applied refresh widgets API to your button, which is what we want to do. So back to the report. You can see this now shows this button run flow, which is great. So this is all in Power BI desktop. And remember, this is, if I press this, if I initiate the Power Automate flow, that's going to refresh the table in the service. So I'm going to publish this report to the service and replace the one that is there already. Great. So let's go back to the Power BI service. Here's my reports. Here's the one that we just published, which hopefully now has got our button in. Great. So let's try it. So let's change some of our rates. Save that. Run the flow. So that should be now refreshing the tax rates table in the service. Now if I refresh the visuals on our reports, took a little while. There we are. We can see that that's updated. So just to recap what we did. So we just tested the API in the Microsoft documentation to see that we could refresh a single table successfully. Then we saw how to, so following Chris Webb's blog, we saw how to build a Power BI app, which and give that the rights to use the API. Then we built a custom connector, or I showed you where to build the custom connector, and then we built a Power Automate flow and put the button in our Power BI report that we could then initiate from the report itself to refresh the table. So let's summarize the pros and cons of using the Power BI REST API and triggering it through Power Automate. On the plus side, I think it's a very nice user interface. You can refresh the report just pressing a button from within the report itself, which is great. I think the biggest advantage, and why I really like this method, is that all of the tables in the report remain in import mode, which means you'll always get the best performance of your reports. So that's why I really like this approach. On the negative side, it's a bit fiddly to set up. You saw there's quite a few steps to go through. and you do need some rights. So you'll need rights to set up the Power BI app that we need to, in order to have access to allow the so that we can access our data model through the API. So that might be a blocker, particularly in larger organisations. But overall, I think it's a good method. It would be great if Microsoft enhanced the standard Power Automate capabilities for Power BI, so that we could just use the regular connectors to achieve the same result. Hopefully that will come in the future. So that's the end of this video. We've been through 5 approaches to refreshing a single table in our Power BI dataset. Appreciate it's been a long video. Thank you for getting this far if you've watched it from the beginning. I'd really love to hear which of these approaches you've used, or which you prefer, which you don't like, which you've had success with. Maybe there's a completely other approach that you use, and that would be fantastic if you could share that with us in the comments. So yeah, just to recap, so my name's Simon Locknane and I'm from Finance Re. We specialise in helping finance functions to automate and improve their processes and reports using the Power BI and the wider Power Platform. So if you'd like to talk to us about any potential projects, then our link to our website will be in the comments to this video. Thanks very much, and hope to see you again soon.